Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcome, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's MomentumAustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
Well, welcome to this week's show. Tim and Des with you once again for Momentum, wherever you are around Australia. We really appreciate you tuning in and spending some time with us this week. Quick point to the website before we launch into the show, MomentumAustralia.org. Send us some feedback, ask a question. You can check out previous shows, a bit more about who we are. But if you'd like to financially support Momentum too, that is also MomentumAustralia.org. But we are rapidly racing towards the end of the year, Des, and we've got a new feature that you're going to highlight for us again this show.
Yeah, it's amazing how it came about. So we now have a new support line for men, and it's called Momentum Care Line. It's an easy number to remember, even for an old bloke like me. It's 1-800-000-MEN. So that's 1-800-000-MEN, which is 636. And this service is provided by our friends at Careline Connections. And if you want to get in touch with them, it's carelineconnections.org.au. And so you can reach out and get help 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 1-800-000-MEN.
All right, that's awesome. Now, we as men, we face many challenges throughout our lives, but perhaps one of the trickiest seasons for us to navigate is our midlife season. Some people have described this part of a man's life a transitioning from the first half to the second half of life. Others have described it as a midlife crisis, when the realization kicks in that we are over halfway through our lives and we kind of start to panic. Either way, it is an important season in a man's life that, if done well, can really help propel him into the second half of his life with a very clear focus and vision of what his life is to look like from there on.
We're so blessed to have with us the CEO of the Australian Institute of Family Counselling, as AIFC, Nick Marks, who's been with us before. He recently spoke to Glenn Williams from the Focus on the Family about this subject on their Counsel Culture podcast. You can hear that episode at counselculture.org.au or at the aifc.com.au website. But Nick joins us now to talk about and help us navigate the midlife transition. Welcome back to Momentum, Nick.
Oh, thank you, Des, and thank you, Tim. It's wonderful to be back with you both today. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for having me back.
Well, Nick, we're grateful to have you back, man. I mean, every time you come on the show, there's so much that you've got to bring, and this is a huge topic, midlife transition for men. It is a biggie. Arguably, probably the only other biggie is outside of that is retirement, which we might do another show on. But let's get back to midlife, because all of us can relate to that. And there'll be guys listening who are in the season. There are guys who are past the season, guys who are coming up to the season and freaking out about it. So I suppose let's start with you. Your experience as a counselor and a coach, particularly. Why is it that men fear or struggle or can wrestle with the midlife approaching?
Just on the retirement one, I can't speak to that one with any authority.
So, it's okay. I can make up for you.
Okay, thank you. If you can wait a few years, I might be able to come back on that one. But at the moment, I can hopefully speak into the midlife one with some authority and experience, lived experience, as the saying goes. And in terms of your question, Tim, I think, wow, it is. There's a lot of room in this discussion, isn't there, to go down some different threads. But I think there's a couple of things that you can mention. Is you are stepping into this unknown, uncharted territory where, for the first time, I think, not that things don't happen in life between adolescent, transitioning from a young person to an adult is probably the first main one. This is really, apart from other things that come up, if we say the vicissitudes of life, there's lots of things that can still happen, but this is the next big one. And, things change around us, and I think things change in us, and we start to change, even involuntary. And I think we hit this uncharted territory in the midlife, and that's the big deal.
Isn't it interesting? I guess there's a couple of different variations of the midlife crisis. One is, you get to approaching 40, and all of a sudden you have to give up playing soccer, or give up playing rugby, or the sort of the young men's games and so forth. And that affects a lot of men. A lot of men look at that and they say, wow, I now have to drive a buggy when I'm playing golf, or whatever it is, right? Their lives change. And so, and the other part of it is, and I guess this one affected me more so than that one, was when my career came to an end. So I was in IT all my life, and all of a sudden I had no project. I had to evaluate what I was going to do going forward. And in both scenarios, you do have to do that evaluation, don't you?
Yeah, I don't know there's any getting around this one, in the sense of maybe on what you were saying too there, Des, is I think there can be a major external change that happens in our life, like it did for you.
Yeah.
And I think, I could say but I tend to think there's major change and shifts going on in us as men around this midlife, which I think is kind of a 15-year band. It's sort of it's moving around. I think the age that we live to, the average age, has gotten higher. So there's this sort of moving mid-band of what we might call those middle life years. And so I think that's an important point to make, is this isn't run and won in sort of, between, 40 and 41. Or 45 and 46 or whatever it might be. It's like, whew, glad I got that done. And let's focus on the new year now. It's I think it's going to be a bit different from that.
And it's fair to say that there are men who will go through this experience at 30. They've had a change of life, the change of circumstances, and all of a sudden they're confronted with the reality of they're no longer in their 20s. They're no longer sort of able to do the things they could have done in their 20s. And they're faced with this dilemma, and it could be their identity. It could be lots of things in there.
Yeah. I mean, interesting you say that, Des, because I remember when I turned 30, I struggled with 30 a lot more than I did with turning 40. And I think because between 20 and 30, I'd become a dad, I'd, become a husband, and all of a sudden my life had radically changed in that decade. So 30 for me was a bigger deal than turning 40, ironically. But Nick, can I just ask, I suppose, with all of this, regardless of what age it hits us, this crisis point or this realization that, wow, I'm getting there. Do you think at the core of all of that for most men is some degree of fear around mortality and a realization that we are on the time frame, like I am going to die at some stage, and I've suddenly had this wake-up call? Is it something along those lines? Is that the core of all of this, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a part of it, is where there's a confrontation, if you like. Now, that can be variations of confrontation, of a slow burn over time, or something, very much in your face as a crisis. I think there's that mortality. We can tend to just sort of get on with life when you're younger. Like you sort of hit adulthood, and then you can be off and away. It might be, I'm into this career, I got married, I've got kids coming, I've got job, I've got responsibilities, and then you can tend to, we're talking a bell curve here, we're not talking everybody's life, there's exceptions of course, but in the bell curve generally, you tend to just move from one thing to another. And then there's something that either within yourself or external that stops us in our tracks as a process or an event. And we are forced, if we allow it to happen, I use that language, to confront this. And I think mortality, my days are numbered, as the Lord says, is part of that. And that's a big deal to confront, where we may not have really stopped before or been forced to stop to confront it. Or it's like, oh yeah, well, I'm 28 or I'm 35. I'll look at that down the track. So I think that's definitely a factor, Tim. It's definitely at the identity level. Something starts to, again, it can be externally, as Des said, or internally going, what is my identity really grounded in? And I think this can be a particularly challenging one for those who might be afflicted with a greater level of success, say, in their careers. And I use the word afflicted kind of
an interesting way to put that.
Because what happens, whether we like it or not, and I'm no exception to this, is it does get in, and it does, latch onto our identity. And I think in the midlife there is this opportunity, and certainly a work of God, where He wants to remove some of those things out of our core identity that are malformed or not truly part of who we really are. And So I think there's varying degrees of work to be done in each of us around the midpoint, and whether that's some mild, sanding back and a new coat of paint, or there's some real construction work there to be done in some of us. I think at the midpoint.
It's interesting. I mean, I can remember when I was in IT at Qantas, and it was a great opportunity and a great career. But what was interesting for me was when I left Qantas. I mean, I could have been out to dinner every night of the week from suppliers, whatever, right? And the moment I left Qantas, I didn't get a single invitation out to dinner. And at that point, I realized, Des, this is not about you. There's a big world going on without you being involved in it anymore. So that was quite a challenge for me.
I hear exactly what you're saying there, Des. And Nick, interesting that you said the affliction of success, because for a lot of men, right, we do base our identity, whether it's intentional or not, on what we do. And so we get to this midway point and we go, okay, I've been pretty sure about certain things. All of a sudden, there's this uncertainty, I suppose, about the mortality piece as well. And then may I just throw this at you as well? We talked about the fear piece, but is it maybe a lack of control as well? As in, like, we realize that we don't have as much control over our changing bodies, our aging bodies, and life in general. We've journeyed through some stuff and go, like, there's just stuff now that is happening to me that I have no control over.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim. Is that maybe maybe we've just sort of had the illusion of control, or there's things that we've focused on that we think we've been able to control up to now. And you definitely get to a point where you're going, I don't know really what's happening here, and whatever is happening here, I'm not in control of it. So that's disturbing at a number of levels. And it's incredibly disruptive. It disrupts the rhythm of thing. And I thought I had a pretty good bead on how life works and my place in it and what's happening. And so some of this is thrown up in the air.
So it's really hard for guys who are in that situation and they don't know what to do. And clearly there's the end worst case scenario in that situation is that, guys may, fall into depression, suicide, all those sort of things are real in lots of men's lives. And so it would be good to talk about the sort of signs to watch out for men who are going through that midlife crisis and are dealing with that. I'm sure there's lots of evidentiary signs that wives can look for or mates can look for to say, hey, we need to keep an eye on this guy.
Yeah, look, I think that, and let's talk about some of those, and perhaps preceding that is, at this point in time, one of the things you can do is you can look around you at this point and go, well, how are other people doing? Yeah. And we can then fall into comparison. Yeah. And, I should be at this stage by now. I mean, I know such and such, most of the other guys I know in my circle, they're this and they've done that. And it's that expectation gap, or, there should be. And then perhaps looking back over our life in terms of could have, should have, would have, those things, I think, we're going to do them at times. But I just mentioned those because they can then, I think, be preceding some things where we can really fall in a hole, at the very minimum get stuck, or as you mentioned, Des, we could get into a place where we get isolated.
Yes.
And we're caught in this thinking about where I should be and my regrets and so on, and fall into some depression, which we may then, and that's where I think the crisis part can come in. If we find ourselves in a hole for whatever reason at this point of life, and then that's usually accompanied with isolation, and then into a cycle, which if that's not arrested and we're not given help and support and where we reach out, yes, it can go down a bad path, which can be depression, can even very sadly for some guys be, I don't think I want to keep going.
I think the key thing, and Des and I talk about this a lot on the show, it is one of the core messages of Momentum, is to make sure that you're connected with other guys, that you've got safe spaces that you can open up to if you're perhaps feeling like, hey, I'm in this season and I'm not even sure what's happening for me. Like, I just know that I'm struggling. I just know that things have shifted and I'm not even sure what's going on for me. And that's the encouragement piece for all of us, is to reach out, have a conversation with someone, or of course, as Des suggested at the beginning of the show, the Momentum Care Line number, 1-800-000-636, 000636. You know, Nick, we recently spoke with Jonathan Doyle about hopes and dreams, and he mentioned that as men, you know, we can tend to get to a stage in life where life becomes fairly cruisy. It settles. We get the job, the house, the wife, the kids, that sort of thing. It becomes somewhat routine. And out of that routine, when we can hit the midlife stage, sometimes we as men are tempted to blow up our lives to try and get some excitement back in our lives. And I suppose that lends itself towards the midlife crisis part as opposed to the midlife transition. So for guys listening right now who might be in that season, you know, where they're approaching the midlife, life has become a bit cruisy, they might be tempted to get a motorbike or buy a boat or a jet ski, or worse, you know, they're perhaps having conversations with someone who's a lot younger than them that they shouldn't be. But it's attractive, it's exciting, it's creating this sense of excitement in their lives, but it has real potential damaging effects to their lives. And let's be honest, I mean, that can happen, right? If we're not careful. So just speak into that space for us, Nick. For guys who might be in that space, what would you recommend if they're in that, if that's how they're dealing with midlife?
Yeah, I'd firstly say that the feelings and emotions, because this is an emotional time, and the midlife transition is messy. So let's just couch it in that to start with. And so there's going to be some strong emotions and feelings that we're having. I think for guys who might be at that, none of us get up in the morning and think, how can I blow up my life today? So this happens over time.
Yes.
And so the accumulations of thoughts and feelings, and I'll use the word desires, because our desires our hearts are desire factories. And so desires are very strong, and we have malformed or unhealthy desires, and we have very honorable, beautiful desires. And, you know, they're both operating simultaneously. When those midlife desires change, and we do start to have different desires, which can manifest as boredom, or I'm restless, I'm listless, what I've been doing just isn't cutting it for me. If we try to up the ante in terms of, you know, we call it self-medicating or upping the excitement, and I'm going to become an adventure junkie, or I'm going to, date someone, 25 years younger than me, and that's not going to be good, particularly if I'm married. And so there's different, I might, the alcohol content might just be going up and up and up and up slowly. So these things happen over time. Yeah. I just want to encourage guys where they're at in that and go, the feelings and the messiness and the emotions around this can be very normal. Mm-hmm. How we then deal with those, and how we deal with them, how we process them, and having other men around us. You guys say this all the time. I think it becomes particularly important in this midlife transition, because one good thing in this is that every man is going to go through this. So we're talking about men here. Every man is going to go through this at some stage. So there's a really good shared commonality in this. And so some things you can do are, for example, reach out to other men who might be a little bit further down, healthy men who are a little bit further down the road, who will have been through this, and just asking them some questions. So that I think is the first one I would say to men and other men who are at the same stage, because they're probably maybe like you are, not talking about it so much. And you've got these very strong emotions that you're going through. So sharing it with others, as scripture says, how do we bear and carry one another's burdens? I think midlife presents a great opportunity for that to take place. And what can be hard and is definitely messy can also be really rich and wonderful as we go through this transition.
That's so true.
There's no driving around it.
No, that's right. And look, I can only speak from my experience, and it's not a good one. I didn't pay attention to the things that were important, that I should have been paying attention to. So, for example, I was flying around the world. I was, having important meetings with great people, and all of a sudden I come home, and my wife, who had been amazing at bringing up my kids, was boring. I felt she was boring, and so, I was at that age where I wanted to continue the adrenaline of excitement. And so that ultimately led to my marriage falling apart. And what I should have done in hindsight is invested a lot more into the relationship that had brought me through the first 20 years of my married life. And I didn't. And I paid the price for that. And, to any man that's out there who's sort of at that point, man, invest in what you have. Don't invest in something else.
It's powerful,
So
Des.
well said, Des.
Really powerful, mate.
it's
Yeah, I
powerful.
really appreciate you sharing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Nick, can I backtrack and say, I mean, and Des,
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about getting connected all the time, and Des, there, I mean, that's a key thing, investing into those around you, but also for men, developing relationships that you can have conversations with. Now, there's a time and a place for that, right? And who we get to speak into our lives is incredibly important. We need the right people that are going to encourage us and love us and support us through that. Let's flip that on its head and go, but what about having space and solitude to process this on our own, right? Because it's good to go to other people, but sometimes we can use that as a deflective mechanism to stop actually sitting in our own space and our own thoughts, to actually go and ask myself, what is really happening for me here? So for guys who might be doing that, the avoidance piece, and like Des to some degree, still looking for excitement and other things, all external, as opposed to going internal and sitting with it and going, what is actually happening for me here?
Well, that's a great message. I 100% endorse that. I mean, it's true. It's so easy to look externally. It's a lot harder to do a self-reflection and look at what we can change internally, or whether it be faith, or whether it be our behavior. It could be our circle of friends, whatever it is. There's lots of things that we need to explore. Yeah.
Well, Nick, you made a comment in your podcast that it's not just a change in the circumstances, but the work that needs to be done within us. And I thought that was really key, because a lot of us, external things will change when we hit midlife, and with our bodies too, which to some degree is an external, as opposed to, okay, but what's actually happening in my feelings, my emotions, my internals, for me at this stage as well. And I think it's really important that guys take the time to sit with that stuff and go, what does this actually mean? Where is this coming from? What's at the heart of all of this for me?
I would say, and look, I turned 50 this year, so I have been through that. I think maybe I'm on the sort of the tail end of the midlife transition now. I still feel like I want to hang on to the midlife transition part, but I might now be out of the clique. So either way, I can speak with some experience. You are the transition in this. So there's these things that are going on around doing and, external role, but you are the transition. And this is really happening in you from your being is actually changing. And so I think the first half can be very much defined as, life 1.0, as Dr. Glenn Williams said on the podcast, can often be defined by work and busyness, the excitement, to use Des's word. And I think it was Bob Buford that coined this term in his halftime ministry and movement that he had. Is 2.0 is moving from, we have this desire to move from success to significance.
Yes.
And I think for that to happen, there is this is the good side of midlife transition. There's some really messy stuff, and there's some unhealthy roots to be pulled out, and that hurts. It really does. And there's this really rich, deep, good stuff to move into the significance side that takes place in us, and that requires the company of other men in particular, and in community, and the time with self, silence, solitude, introspection, and deeper change that's going to take on. And if you're a person of faith, and I know not everybody listening to this is, but if you're a person of faith, then this time with the Lord, with our Maker, He has some real work to be done in us. And the upside and the outside of that, getting to the other side of this transition, there's good, rich things on the other side of this transition, and to be encouraged by that, and who we're becoming in life 2.0, and what that's going to do in terms of blessing others, and living that life of significance, and having that greater impact. We might not be zipping around the world as much or doing as much activity as it might seem on the outside, but there's a lot of deeper work going under there. So we narrow the focus, increase the power.
And the opportunity to sow into the lives of those who are coming up behind you as well. And so you younger people in your circle of friends, in your church, in your men's group or whatever, get alongside some of the younger ones and encourage them and support them and be their mentor and be their coach in doing life, and learn from your mistakes even.
Yeah,
I think that's really important. It's always good to give back. Yeah, for sure. And I think when you reach that stage in life, like you just said, Nick, part of the significance piece is actually, I realize this is no longer just about me. And this is more about legacy on what, right, and what am I leaving, not just to my immediate family and my kids, but those around me. And that's the significance piece. And I love the fact that you brought the faith in there, because as we know, when we're on a faith journey, when we surrender our lives, it no longer becomes about us, but about how do we leave a legacy unto the kingdom as well. I just want to perhaps play a bit of devil's advocate, if that's the right phrase, and say, if we don't do this season well, Nick, right? If we don't look at this stuff in the 40s or the early 50s or whatever it may be, what can be some of the long-term consequences of that for men? Is it that we become some of those grumpy old men that we sometimes see, who are just miserable in old age, and is it that they've got a lot of unresolved stuff? Like, what can be the long-term effects if we don't process some of this stuff well?
Yeah, I said kind of, thank you, Tim. I said just in passing before, like, there's no driving around this. I think if we, but you can kick the can down the road. And just, I think that's where the crises can come in terms of it being a crisis of our own making. So crises happen externally, that happens, but crises of our own making, I think, come where we kick the can down the road. And this is hard. There's some hard work to be done here.
Yes.
And that's like, and I think, as you said earlier, we're creatures of comfort, but growth doesn't happen in that comfort zone. Yeah. And so, yes, we kick the can down the road, but I think you can only do that so long, and then other things start to happen as you start to, I don't want to sound too dramatic in my language, but I think you start to die on the inside, and you just get cynical or bitter, or you just shut down, or that the next life that you have, and that 2.0 doesn't get birthed, because the 1.0 that needs to die, or parts of it, is really hard, but we miss out on what sort of, we miss out on the seed getting planted and the next growth that comes. And that's a beautiful thing, and it's really hard. And I think others miss out, as you alluded to in speaking into others' lives, others miss out on Tim 2.0, Des 2.0, Nick 2.0 in their lives, because we've got a lot to offer. And then we come to this great realization, it never was about me. So really, and that's a wonderful realization to wake up to, I think, because then we can, because as you get older, you realize it's less about me. I'm not caring about myself as much, and I don't care what others think about me now. And funny enough, I actually care more about other people. This is a fantastic reversal.
Yeah, that's true.
I love that. Nick, in the few minutes that we've got left, just concluding all of this, and I mean, again, we've to some degree scratched the surface, but in some degree we've gone in all different directions. So just to try and bring it back to a couple of key 3 or 4 points that you can leave men, either who are struggling with the midlife crisis, approaching the midlife crisis, or can see, they're around a mate or whatever who can see that they're struggling with that. Just 3 or 4 thoughts to leave us with today.
Look, starting off, sitting down and just, thinking on this about your own life. Where am I at? Asking yourself some of these questions, and just jotting down some, how am I feeling? What's happening? And it's almost like an inventory around, relationships, career, might be around work, those sort of things. And just, sort of doing, this is where I'm, in the shopping center where it says on the board, you are here with the red dot. This is where you are. It's almost like doing a you are here audit. This is where I'm at the moment, and be real with ourselves, because I've got a great ability to deceive myself. That leads into the second one, is having other men around you who have been through this and seem to have done it well, and others who are going through it. I think that's a really good thing. There's some places you can reach out to. There's the Halftime organization, halftime.org.au. That's Glenn Williams, who I spoke to on our podcast, and John Sakema run. It's a great ministry, because there's others out there who have gone through this before. And reaching out to them, I would recommend that. They're doing a great work. And just listening to things like this and having these conversations with other men, because every man is going to go through this. And I think, again, back to the faith side, I think this is something really dear to God's heart, because we always see in Scripture, whenever God's preparing men and women, it's men and women, in this case men, is for their next season, and going deeper, there has to be some wilderness experience, if you like, some change and transformation that involves some things dying and some new things being birthed, so we can be that straight arrow for him to shoot into that second half. And I think that's from that faith perspective, there's some rich soil here for us to be growing in and exploring. So yeah, there's some things that come to mind.
Fantastic. As always, a real pleasure having our special guest, Nick Marks from AAFC. He's the CEO. And just going to point you, before we finish up today, to the podcast that we've referred to a few times about this topic with Glenn Williams from Focus on the Family. Cancel Culture Podcast, you can hear that at cancelculture.org.au. Nick mentioned Halftime. Halftime.org.au is their website. Certainly encourage you to check them out as well. And if you want to have another website just to look at through the week, MomentumAustralia.org, of course, is our website with Tim and Des all around Australia. Hey, Nick, we've so enjoyed having you on the show. As always, there's a lot that we've unpacked today, and we really appreciate you speaking to this really, really important space for men. As always, mate, really appreciate it. Bless you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much to you, Tim, and to you, Des. I hope this helps the men out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely, and keep an eye on our website too. That's MomentumAustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is MomentumAustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.